Picture this. You've just been handed a massive project, and you're told to find the absolute best way forward from a stack of competing, high-stakes proposals. No pressure, right? Well, today in this explainer, we're going to unpack the exact critical phase in engineering economy that makes doing that entirely possible. We're diving into Chapter 6, Evaluating Mutually Exclusive Alternatives. We're going to break down the precise financial and mathematical frameworks used to evaluate these competing projects so that you can confidently make the absolute best, most objective investment decision. Okay, let's dive right in. So here's the core problem we face all the time as engineers and project managers. You've got a specific need, let's say upgrading a manufacturing facility, or maybe rolling out a massive new software system. Your team comes back to you with 3 totally viable, expertly engineered solutions, but you only have the capital to fund one of them. How do you choose when multiple projects meet the exact same need? You literally can't just pick your favorite. You have limited resources, and we need to zero in on the one solution that absolutely maximizes value. Here's the game plan for this explainer. 1. Mutually exclusive alternatives. 2. Principles of engineering economy. 3. Revenue versus service projects. 4. Setting the planning horizon. And 5. Mastering incremental analysis. All right, Section 1. Understanding mutually exclusive alternatives. Mutually exclusive alternatives, or MEAs for short, are actually pretty simple in theory. It just means that when one of several alternatives that meet the same need is selected, all the others are rejected. It's a strict either-or situation. But wait, here is the crucial caveat. These alternatives might have totally different initial investments and varying annual costs, but they absolutely must provide comparable usefulness. That means they need to deliver comparable performance, quality, and functionality. Think about it. If one option solves the problem but completely falls apart in a week, yeah, that's not comparable usefulness, and so it's not a true alternative. Notice how this plays out mathematically. With independent events, things can overlap, right? You could potentially fund Project A and Project B at the same time. But for mutually exclusive events, those circles do not touch. The choices simply don't overlap. If you go all in on A, B is entirely off the table. We're examining these choices strictly on the basis of economic considerations alone. Moving on to Section 2, Principles of Engineering Economy. You'll want to keep these 7 fundamental principles of engineering economy in your back pocket. You have to develop the alternatives, focus purely on their differences, use a consistent viewpoint, use a common unit of measure, consider all relevant criteria, make uncertainty explicit, and ultimately revisit your decisions. Now, the absolute secret weapon on this list, using a common unit of measure. This is the key to a true apples-to-apples comparison. I mean, you can't evaluate one project in yen over 3 years and compare it against another evaluated in dollars over 10 years. It just doesn't work. You have to ensure all alternatives are evaluated on the exact same basis. Section 3, Revenue versus Service Projects. In pretty much any economic study, you're evaluating one of 2 things: revenue projects or service projects. For revenue projects, the income generated depends entirely on your choice. The revenue and cost streams are going to vary wildly depending on which alternative you select. But for service projects, it's a completely different story. The income remains the exact same. It's fixed, regardless of which project is selected. You just need the service provided. Like, say, installing an HVAC system. The revenue of having a comfortable, climate-controlled building doesn't change whether you buy brand X or brand Y. Only the costs change. But here's the golden rule across both of those types. Projects must be compared over an equal time span. As a rule of thumb, if the required service period is given, your analysis period needs to match that required service period exactly. You simply cannot compare a machine that lasts 5 years to one that lasts 10 years without adjusting your timeline to make it fair. Which brings us nicely to Section 4, Setting the Planning Horizon. The planning horizon is just the defined time period over which these mutually exclusive alternatives are compared. Like we just talked about, returning to our apples-to-apples motif, this period has to be completely fair and appropriate for the decision you're making. If your alternatives have equal lives, well, your job is easy. Just use that shared lifespan. But what happens when they have unequal lives, and at least one of them doesn't match a required study period? Well, we handle unequal lives using 2 distinct assumptions. First, the repeatability assumption. This essentially says, hey, we'll just replace the shorter-lived equipment when it dies. You assume the study period is either infinitely long or a common multiple of the alternative's lives, and the economic consequences of the first life cycle just repeat in the next ones.
Alternatively, you can use the coterminated assumption. This is where a strict specific cutoff period is established for the analysis. You essentially force all the alternatives to fit that horizon, usually by estimating a salvage value right at that cutoff point.
All right, final stretch, Section 5, Mastering Incremental Analysis. When you're comparing mutually exclusive alternatives, you generally have two ways to go about it. The total investment approach uses absolute measures, things like present worth, future worth, and annually equivalent. Meanwhile, the incremental investment approach uses relative measures, like yield percentage or ratios. You do this by making a pairwise comparison to create an incremental cash flow. And let me tell you, this relative approach is incredibly powerful. Here is the core philosophy of incremental analysis. It really boils down to asking yourself one question. Can the extra benefits obtained by investing additional capital be justified against a cheaper base alternative? The logic is strict here. If the extra benefits of the more expensive option are better than what you could get by investing that exact same amount of extra capital elsewhere in your company at the minimum attractive rate of return, or MAR, then yes, absolutely make the investment. If not, stick with the cheaper base option. Let's put some actual numbers to this to see it in practice. Notice the differences in the flow structures here. Project A requires an initial cash outlay of $1,000, more outlay in period 1, and then it yields steady positive returns. Pretty straightforward, right? It's a simple investment. Project B, though, that one is wilder. An initial cost of $1,000, a massive positive jump in period 1, a huge negative drop of over $5,000 in period 2, and then positive again. Because the cash flow changes signs more than once, we call it a non-simple investment. Project C? That gets you $1,000 upfront, followed by steady negative payments. It's simply a borrowing project. To figure out which investment project is better between A and B, we actually have to look at the increments between them. And this leads us to the formal incremental investment analysis procedure. The absolute vital first step, and you cannot skip this, is that you must arrange and rank order your feasible alternatives based on increasing capital investment. You start small and you go large. Then you establish a base alternative. For cost alternatives, your first cheapest option is the base. For investment alternatives, your base is the very first alternative that actually meets your minimum requirements, meaning its internal rate of return is greater than your MAR. Let's actually slow down for a sec, because this three-step recipe is crucial, and you iterate it until every single project has been considered. Step 1. Compute the cash flow difference by subtracting the cash flow of the lower investment project from the higher investment project. Step 2. Compute the internal rate of return, or IRR, on just this specific incremental difference. Step 3. Accept the more expensive higher investment if, and only if, that incremental IRR is strictly greater than your minimum attractive rate of return. If that increment isn't attractive, the extra cost just isn't worth it. The lower-ranked base alternative wins, and the loser is permanently thrown out of consideration. And just like that, we're at the end of our explainer. But I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. By enforcing this strict incremental math, how does your approach to complex capital investments fundamentally change? What we've seen today is that by rigidly defining our alternatives, forcing common time horizons, and rigorously testing only the incremental differences against our MAR, we transform those overwhelming subjective project battles into decisive, objective mathematical certainties. You're no longer guessing in the dark, you're mathematically proving the best path forward. Thanks so much for watching, and keep focusing on the math.